You know this building. You've seen it in 100 films, on 1,000 postcards, the strangest skyscraper in New York, narrow as a ship's prow cutting up Fifth Avenue. It's one of the most recognizable buildings on Earth. So how did it end up like this? No tenants, no lights, the most famous address in Manhattan sitting dark for 6 years while its owners went to war in court, and a man nobody had ever heard of bid $190 million to win it, then vanished without paying a single cent. This is the full story of the Flatiron Building and how it finally came back. The year is 1901. Broadway cuts diagonally across Manhattan's grid, the oldest road on the island, older than the grid itself, and where it crosses Fifth Avenue, it leaves something behind. A triangular wedge of land with no right angles, no parallel walls, and a tip barely 6.5 feet wide. Every serious developer in Manhattan looks at it and walks away. The geometry is useless. The narrowest point is roughly the width of a dining table. Nobody can figure out what to build here, let alone how to build it. Fuller Construction buys it anyway. They hire Daniel Burnham, the architect who master-planned the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and give him one instruction: build a skyscraper on that triangle. Burnham's solution was the first thing his critics missed. Instead of thick masonry walls doing all the structural work, the only method anyone had used before, he used a hidden internal cage of steel to carry the entire load. The walls became a skin, decorative but not structural. This was the steel skeleton frame, and it was not yet standard in New York. The steel components were prefabricated off-site, cut to precise dimensions, and shipped to a location with no room to store anything. What arrived one day was bolted into place the next. The result? One new floor per week. 22 stories on an impossible site, finished in under a year. The frame was completed by February 1902. The building opened on October 1st, 1902. Think about what that meant in 1902. No tower cranes, no power tools, steel hoisted by hand, and rivets driven by men hanging off the frame. They put it up in a year, and it has outlasted glass towers built generations later. The press called it Burnham's Folly. The New York Tribune called it a stingy piece of pie, the greatest inanimate troublemaker in New York. The New York Times called it a monstrosity. New Yorkers placed informal bets on how long before it toppled. The wind problem at 23rd Street, where Broadway and Fifth Avenue and Madison Square Park all converge, created chaotic downdrafts that stripped hats off pedestrians and shook shop windows. A neighboring tradesman sued the building's owners after his window was blown in twice by the newly created gale. What the critics didn't understand was that Burnham had already solved it. The building was engineered to withstand 4 times the maximum expected wind load. Its foundations reached Manhattan bedrock, the same ancient schist that would eventually make New York the skyscraper capital of the world. They were still predicting a collapse when it opened. It stood, and the wind stayed. The downdrafts at 23rd Street created something the neighborhood had never seen. Women walked through wearing long skirts. This was 1902, and the gusts lifted them. Men began to gather deliberately. They loitered in groups at the corner watching. Police were dispatched to move them along. The officer's command to clear the area, move it, get out, go, entered the vocabulary of the city. The most widely told origin story of the expression 23 Skidoo is this building, this corner, these men, this wind. The building's owners tried hard to call it the Fuller Building. New York renamed it immediately. The flat-bottomed clothes iron, the kind pressed against garments in the district 2 blocks away, had exactly this shape. The Flatiron Building, and the nickname won before the scaffolding was fully down. The Flatiron Building was not just a shape, it was an interior world. The triangular floors created offices no other building in Manhattan had, some so narrow that senior staff could touch both walls with outstretched arms. The pointed bow at the northern tip was not wasted space as critics assumed. It was the most prized address in the building. From inside that tip, One window looks straight down the full length of Fifth Avenue, and the window right next to it looks straight down Broadway. No other office in Manhattan offers that view. The quirks ran deeper than the shape. When the building opened, it had no women's restrooms at all. The architects had simply never included them, on the assumption that tenants would be men. The fix was as awkward as the oversight. Management designated the restrooms on even-numbered floors for men and the odd-numbered floors for women, an arrangement that survived for over a century. And the elevators were water-powered. Original hydraulic lifts that were slow, occasionally leaked, and had a habit of giving out. When a 21st floor was added in 1905, the elevators only ran to the 20th. To reach the very top of the most famous building in New York, you had to get out and take a second one. In 1915, a puppeteer named Tony Sarg set up his studio inside the Flatiron Building, drawn by the publishers and newspapermen who filled its floors. A decade later, working for Macy's, Sarg designed the first giant balloon characters for the Thanksgiving Day Parade, the floating upside-down marionettes that fill Midtown every November. The traditions millions watch each year traces back to a man who got his start on one of these triangular floors. Alfred Stieglitz photographed it in 1903 through bare winter branches in Madison Square Park, an image still considered one of the greatest architectural photographs ever taken, and Edward Hopper painted it. It appeared on postcards worldwide and became shorthand for New York before the Empire State Building existed, later turning up everywhere from Spider-Man's Daily Bugle to the city's skyline shots. Through it all, the building filled with publishers, Macmillan, St. Martin's Press, Springer Verlag, making the address one of the most prestigious in American letters. And then, in 2019, it went silent. Macmillan Publishers, the last major tenant in residence since 2004, packed up and moved to a modern building downtown. For the first time in over a century, nobody was working inside the Flatiron Building. The building had a fractured ownership structure. 4 parties: Jeffrey Gural's GFP Real Estate, the Sorgente Group, ABS Real Estate Partners, and the brokerage Newmark together held a 75% majority, and they wanted to convert the building to luxury residential. The remaining 25% belonged to one man, Nathan Silverstein. And because the ownership agreement gave every partner veto power over major decisions, Silverstein's quarter stake was enough to block everything. No plan could move forward. Months became years. The scaffolding went up. One of the most photographed buildings in the world disappeared behind grey boards. New York has been here before. In 1963, it demolished Penn Station, a Beaux-Arts masterpiece torn down for a new Madison Square Garden. The outcry that followed directly triggered the New York City Landmarks Law of 1965. The law that now protects the Flatiron Building exists because of what happened the last time New York stopped caring about what it had. The building was protected by law. It was not protected from 6 years of neglect, from being hollowed out, from becoming a ghost of itself on a corner where people still stopped mid-stride to look up. March 22, 2023. A New York Supreme Court judge had ordered a forced public auction, the first for this building in nearly 100 years. Bidding opened at $50 million. Over 40 minutes, competing bids pushed it higher. Jeffrey Gural's group pushed it to $189.5 million. Then Jacob Garlick, 31 years old, managing partner at Abraham Trust, a name nobody in the room recognized, bid $190 million and won. 10 days to provide a $19 million deposit. The deadline passed and the money did not come. Garlick's lawyers submitted a bank statement with all identifying information redacted. They cited a problem with 2 separate banks, first Truist, then PNC. They requested an extension. The court-appointed referee ruled Garlick out as a buyer. Before the deadline passed, Garlick had told NY1, "It's been my lifelong dream since I was 14 years old. I've worked every day of my life to be in this position." Then, silence. The auction had required no financial proof from bidders to participate. Zero vetting, walk in, bid any number, and walked back out. Jeffrey Gurral told reporters he suspected Garlick had been acting for Silverstein, a distant relative, to drive up the price and punish the majority owners. Silverstein never responded to requests for comment. The lawsuit against Abraham Trust remains unresolved as of 2026. The building that had survived being called a folly, survived the Depression, survived a century of New York, nearly derailed by one man nobody could locate in an auction that let anyone participate with no consequences. March 23, 2023. Second auction. This time, a $100,000 certified check was required at the close of bidding and proof of funds before participation. Garlick was present but not permitted to bid. Jeffrey Gurral's group, joined by new partner the Brodsky Organization, acquired the building for $161 million, $29 million less than the phantom bid that had never been real. Their plan? 38 luxury condominiums. For the first time in 124 years, the Flatiron building would be a place people live, not work. Studio Sofield is designing the interiors. The renovation involves replacing more than 1,000 windows individually, restoring thousands of terracotta fixtures one by one, repairing the 6-foot cornice, and a full mechanical gut, all within the constraints of a National Historic Landmark. The architects faced a problem no amount of money could fully solve. How do you build gracious apartments on floors with no right angles? Every room is a triangle. Think about what that means to actually live in. There are no rectangular rooms to fall back on, no standard corner for a bed or sofa, no flat run of wall long enough for a wardrobe without it cutting across a window. Closets get tucked into the acute corners where the walls pinch too tight for furniture. Kitchens and bathrooms, the rooms that can live without daylight, get pushed toward the thick center of the wedge, leaving the wide, light-filled angles for living space. At the prow, where the building narrows to its famous point, the rooms end not in a corner, but in a glass blade aimed straight up the avenue. The answer the architects reach for? Rather than hide the building's original diagonal steel braces, in place since 1902, they left them exposed inside the apartments. The bones become the decor. The building's age becomes its most expensive feature. Starting price, $10.95 million for a 3-bedroom. The 21st floor, the entire floor, 7,441 square feet, 5 bedrooms, was listed at $50 million. To put the scale of this in perspective, the entire building had sold for $161 million just 2 years earlier. A single one of these apartments now asks a meaningful fraction of that. It went into contract in April 2026 at $58.5 million. 9 of the 38 units are currently in contract. March 26, 2026. The scaffolding that went up in November 2019 began to come down. For the first time in years, the limestone and terracotta facade was clean, the cornice repaired, the 1,000 new windows in place, the surface restored. And for the first time in 124 years, the building will be lit at night. LED lighting, approved by the Landmarks Preservation Commission, most pronounced on the top 5 floors beneath the cornice. Bar Pizzolino is opening at the base. James Beard award-winning chefs Rita Sodi and Jodie Williams behind Via Carota. The first restaurant they've agreed to open outside of the West Village. Completion target, end of 2026. The building was constructed on land no developer would touch, in a shape everyone openly mocked, using a method the city had barely trusted. The press called it a folly. New Yorkers bet it would fall in the first strong wind. It is 124 years old. Someone just paid more to sleep inside it than anyone has paid for a single address in this building's history. Burnham could not have predicted any of this. He only had to build it. The landmarks law that saved the Flatiron only exists because New York first lost Penn Station. So here is what I want to know. Which building in your city is the one that could still go either way? The one you'd be devastated to lose? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Megabuilds for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.